Hello, welcome back from the break. We're here with somebody that we've been big fans of for a while. This is kind of the perfect time to have her on. So Melissa Lockard, she is the senior staff writer and editor for baseball at The Athletic. So you've seen her probably write some pieces for the A's and for the Giants, mostly, the best teams, the Bay Area sports teams. So
Melissa, are we kind of competitors since you do the seam heads? Like, I think that, is this allowed? I don't
know. I think it's all good publicity, right? They'd always say when your name is out there, it's always good publicity. But no, I think I'm not aware of anything in the contract. I'll let you know if I end up getting fired over it, though.
Your people will talk to our people, kind of thing.
Yeah. We've had Alex from Ricky Blogs, and we've had Jason from Locked On here. So I think it's all just like one big family. We all just try to keep it kosher. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So welcome. We were kind of joking right before this. When we first initially reached out to you to kind of join and talk with us, we're going to be a little more better spirits. Like, cool, baseball's back. The deal's been signed, but it's not. And it's kind of been perfect timing because, hey, reality is this is your bread and butter. The minors are going to be kind of the go-to. So from our understanding, minor league stuff's going to be going on as normal. Like, season will be kicking off regular.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, normal is a little relative. I think we have to keep in mind that no 40-man roster players can be in any minor league situation whatsoever. So they can't be in minor league camp right now. They can't be on AAA rosters when that season opens if the lockout is still going on. So that includes people who haven't made their major league debut. That would include Nick Allen. That would include Jordan Diaz, Jorge Juan, although obviously those guys were, relatively new to the 40-man roster. So it's kind of a weird situation. I mean, I'm very curious to see if this drags on, what the opening day roster for the AAA teams are going to look like, because I think you're going to have to kind of fill them out with rookie ball players in some instances. Or it may cause the teams to decide to push guys up that maybe wouldn't have necessarily been at that level before. So, we're kind of entering a very weird phase, but it's almost the flip of 2020 when we had only the big leagues and none of the minor leagues were happening, right? So as strange as that was, this at least will get a big portion of the organization going, and hopefully this thing gets resolved in the next few weeks. And we're only talking about a weird opening to the season. So, but yeah, right now mini camp is going on in Mesa for the A's and for most of the other organizations. Not every organization does a mini camp, but most of them do. And then opening up the entire spring training for pitchers and catchers for the A's is this later this week, and position players follows a couple days later. So they'll be going, there'll be games going on, but in the different complexes and all that as normal, pretty much a week from now.
That's got to be a little concerning though, right? Considering like some of these guys, maybe they were like rookie ball last year and they're like going to shoot up to AA, like just like that, because they have to fill out these spots. Like, I don't know if I'm the front office for the A's, I would be a little kind of worried about that for some of these like young guys who just got drafted.
Yeah, it's not an ideal situation. I mean, I think you're looking at like bench guys mostly. Your backbone of most of your rosters is going to be what it was going to be. But you're going to look at catchers who maybe have caught very little time coming up and filling out, the back end of a AAA roster. Or like, for instance, Logan Davidson, had a kind of a rough year at Midland. Yeah. Not one that they necessarily were like down on him for or whatever. But I think, any reasonable kind of thought would be, and maybe you go back there again and give AA another try. But in this scenario, and no Nick Allen to block him at AAA, maybe they do start him up in AAA and see. In his case, that might not actually be the worst thing, because the hitting environment, of course, is so much better in Las Vegas. He could get off to a really hot start, feel really good about himself, and never look back. So, you never
hot
know.
In every emphasis of the word too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but those are sort of the storylines I think we'll follow in the next couple of weeks as this sort of develops.
You're on mute, Julio.
Sorry. We all know how hot that Vegas stadium gets during the summer, and think about it. You're getting a break from, I'm in Midland, Texas. I'm getting called up to Las Vegas.
Yeah. It's wild. I mean, for the hitters, it's like a dream, especially if you're a right-handed hitter. That ballpark in Midland, the winds are pretty intense. And so, Chris Carter can go there and hit 40 home runs, but most guys, even guys like Matt Chapman, it took a little while to get them used to the idea that they could kill a ball and it's going to die in right center field. So, they love it. They get up to Vegas and it's like, a whole new world for them. The pitchers, though, all of a sudden their breaking balls don't work anymore because the air is so thin. The winds are also pretty crazy in Vegas, but in a different way. It's very dry. It's very hot. And there's like 4 other ballparks in that league that are exactly like that. You look at like Albuquerque and Reno and stuff. So it can get in the pitchers' heads pretty quickly.
Damn, inflated numbers. I never heard about that. That's insane okay. I'm going to keep a close ear on that now.
You look at it in ERA, like, I don't know if you look at like Brian Howard is in the mini camp right now. And he's a guy I was a little surprised they did protect in the Rule 5 draft, but is someone that I wouldn't be shocked if he made his major league debut this year. If you look at his numbers, his ERA at home last year was somewhere in the 5s or 6s, but on the road, it was like 3.85. And if I'm evaluating him and generally speaking, I think the 3.85 is a lot more accurate as to the kind of performance he put together at a AAA level than anything you're going to look at in the Vegas ballpark.
Interesting.
Hearing you say Chris Carter just made me so sad because I remember when they first traded him in the end of the 2012 season, I loved him. It was like, oh, this is going to be our power hitter.
He would thrive in today's game.
Yes.
He would thrive.
I mean, he hit 46 home runs and couldn't find a job in big leagues. It's like, it's crazy how his career trajectory went. I think it's a lot about what this whole lockout scenario is about, right? Like, here's a guy who should have been able to put together a pretty comfortable major league career of a few seasons making good money. And teams just decided they could get similar production cheaper and didn't sign him. And he led the National League in home runs. It's pretty crazy. He deserved a longer career than he had.
It kind of feels like during like peak COVID this past winter with the NBA, where you were seeing guys who were like getting 10-day contracts off the street and you're like, they just scored 40. Like, what's going on kind of thing.
They played like 8 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Or seeing like DeMarcus Cousins making a comeback again. And it's like, good for them,
Lance Stevenson.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So a couple weeks ago, you wrote a really great piece, a great breakdown, just talking about the 33 players that you should be checking out at minicamp. If for the listeners, if you're not subscribed to Athletic, please do so. It's some of the best like A's writing you're going to get throughout the whole entire year. It's honestly, I kind of look at it as like my little like nighttime stories every night. I'll read something about the
part of the New York Times now too. Part of the New York Times now.
Yeah, there you
go.
That's
That's huge. Like,
you can get your Wordle and your
that's as much credibility journalism wise as you can get these days. Like, if New York Times purchases you, like, that's a big freaking deal.
Yeah, and we got free crosswords with it. It's pretty exciting.
I'm actually super jealous of that. I had the like major crosswords during like 2020, but now I'm just sticking. I just stick to my minis and I just try to get under a minute every day.
Oh, I know, right? Yeah. I feel the same way.
But the list is super comprehensive. There's a lot of familiar names. There might be some names that if you've been kind of out of tune for this last few months that you may not be familiar with the A's fan base. But I think the biggest thing going into this is like, especially now the lockout is in full initiation. We're missing out the first couple weeks this season. You're going to have a lot of fans who maybe be tuning into watching minor league baseball for maybe their first time. So as somebody you've spent your career covering a lot of minors, what are kind of some things like tips they should give to people watching for the first time? Because, this isn't the majors.
Right.
There's going to be some differences there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a very important distinction. I think, even at the AAA level, the game is not going to be what you expect. If you're watching it on MLB TV, the broadcast is definitely not going to be what you expect. The announcers are fabulous, but the camera work is pretty bad. But that being said, it's still an insight into watching these. It's, it's a subscription, but it's one I love every year. I can kind of click around and I'm in Lansing, I'm in Midland, I'm if Stockton is on the road, I can still watch a number of their games. So, the MILB TV is a fun investment if you're somebody who can sit and watch the games. If not, even just checking out box scores every night is just sort of a fun way to kind of keep an eye on what's going on. I try to keep people as updated as I can as well. I was doing a daily sort of rundown of highlights last year on The Athletic, where it just pulling out, guys that had sort of good performances the night before. So, that's one way to do it. It's a lot of players, and so it's not like you're going to know everybody who you're watching every night, but you start to see patterns of guys that show up in those types of highlighted box scores every day. And then you start to think, okay, this is a guy that I really want to watch. If you live in the Bay Area and you have a chance to go out to Stockton and watch some games, it's a great ballpark. It's small. It's very geared towards family. So if you got kids, you bring them there, and there's a ton of stuff to do that, will keep them entertained while you can watch the game. The players are usually, now that we're hopefully getting past a lot of the COVID restrictions, the players are pretty accessible. They'll sign a lot of, gear and all that sort of thing. The Aviators come into Sacramento a decent amount as well. So you could go and watch A's Giants at the AAA level, up at what used to be known as Rayleigh Field. I forget the new name. But that's also a nice ballpark. So, getting out to those games is really a lot of fun. And it's a more affordable, baseball experience, even when the big leagues are here.
Julio, we got to go get our Tyler Soderstrom autographs now, then, when they're worth money in about 5 years when he blows up.
I was gonna say, I think the person who I feel like they've had every single picture with every single like major minor leaguer has been right field Will. If you just look at like his Twitter timeline, every time like, how the hell did he get a picture with this guy like 5 years before?
He is everywhere. I'm in Mesa. I look, and he's there. It's in Sacramento and Stockton, and anywhere that you want to go, it's awesome. He actually is part of the reason these things get fun, because you can see how the players react to him. And it's in a lot of, the A's don't pay him, of course, but he's a huge ambassador to the organization for these guys coming in, because they feel really important really early that somebody like him is paying as much attention to them as they are. So he's awesome. I hope he never stops, with his involvement.
When Hal, the hot dog economist, put together the March Madness or the whatever Madness of A's fan Twitter, we lost to him, and we're like, it was an honor. Like, thank you so much.
I felt that way when I went up against Dave Stewart. I was like, I'm pretty sure you were my favorite pitcher of all time when I was a kid. Like, I do not even want to be in the same sentence as you. So.
I would have been insulted if we beat Will, honestly. Like, that would have just been like, what is going on? I will second I went to college in Sacramento, so I will second your Rayleigh Field. I used to love going to games in the summertime at Rayleigh Field. It's beautiful. It's right on the river. It's easily accessible. And there's a lot to do there. I loved it. Yeah. Yeah,
and the grass at both stadiums, there's a big grass area for the kids to run around. If you've ever brought little ones to a game and they don't want to sit still, it's perfect. They run off. You can enjoy the game and have a beer. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and the bullpen pitchers are always really engaging to the kids too.
Yes.
They're really cool. Yeah, they toss up balls all the time. It's great.
Yeah. Also, I had to check. The name is now Sutter Health Park, but
yes,
like
I should know that. I write it all the time, but like it's I still call it the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum. So
I was gonna say in typical Bay Area fan fashion, like we'll never call it whatever the actual Chris and I are actually both in LA, and we still call it Staples. And when people say crypto, we're like, crypto.com arena.
That's just a bad name anyway.
Yeah, it is. It's look, we could go on all day about weird stadium names, especially all the different names from Oakland. But at the end of the day, we're here to talk about kind of the young guys who we're going to be looking forward to. So among the 33 guys, I know there's a couple guys you mentioned, but for this year, who could you see really jumping up and make an impact this year? And then I know you've tried to lean away from doing this in the past. You wrote like a piece about, what would your future A's look like? And you're like, hey, I did that back in 2019. It just didn't look well.
Right.
So, but who could you see, 3 years from now, who's going to be like a part of it? No pressure at all.
No, I mean,
it's not like we're recording this.
right. Exactly. Not like this never disappears from the internet. I think the guys that are currently in minicamp, the ones that you're going to probably see at the big league level are more the veteran types. Most of the A's top prospects that are in this are in their kind of first or second year, and aren't likely to reach the big leagues. But some of the pitchers, though, I mean, I think Parker Dunshee had an injury last year that really kind of stopped his progress a little bit. But he's a guy that they were really high on from the alternate site in 2020, and could be a really interesting sort of swingman at the back end of the rotation. I mentioned Brian Howard earlier. I think he's another one, especially if they do end up trading some of their starters out of the rotation. They're going to need a lot of depth, and these are guys that could give them that. Aaron Brown's a left-handed reliever who they picked up last year as a minor league free agent and brought back again, and had a really nice year at Midland, and got a little bit of time at Vegas. And he could be a guy that they could use some left-handed relief help, who could come up and help them out a little bit. Danny Jimenez, I think you guys saw a little bit of him last spring.
Yep.
Probably should have kept him given how everything ended up going down with the bullpen. And he pitched really well for AAA in the Toronto organization after he was sent back there. Big time arm, command issues sometimes, but if you can get it under control, he's one of those guys that like every year you're kind of like, where'd this reliever come from? Like he could be one of those guys. So those are sort of the guys I would kind of pay attention to. Obviously, like Eric Thames, there's a very decent chance that he's your DH first baseman, depending on how the trades and everything else go down whenever this lockout ends. And again, like as fun as it was to watch Chris Davis hit in Las Vegas last year for that brief amount of time, him in Las Vegas is going to be, kind of wild. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But, for the future, I remember when Matt Chapman and Matt Olson were coming up in the system, and they were, one level apart for some of their time, but you kind of had a sense that they were going to arrive at about the same time. And I think you get that similar feeling with Tyler Soderstrom and Zach Gelloff. Soderstrom is younger because he's a high school guy, but hasn't a full year under his belt of pro ball. But both of them, sort of have that maybe another 1.5, 2 years trajectory till they get to the big leagues. And they're both going to be really, really good players. And whether Soderstrom's the catcher or first baseman, I think remains to be seen. But, these are guys that I think are going to anchor the lineup in a few years for them.
When I think of I'm personally really excited for the Eric Thames signing because he checks a lot of the boxes that like the A's have always done for the last, 10, 15 years. Are you kind of in the back end of your career? Check. Cheap. Can you hit dingers? Yes. Are you a Bay Area native? Yes. It's like, because I didn't know he was from the South Bay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's like pretty cool.
We talked about before you came on. We're like, should we ask her about things? Like, no, that's a minor league signing, but like, let's be honest, it's not going to be a minor league.
It's fun.
Guy. Like,
no,
I don't know.
It is.
Yeah.
Remember when they would bring in, Brandon Moss. That was a similar sort of deal, right? Like, he was had played some in the big leagues, had some success, then was struggling, and then he comes off. And I remember they were like kind of torn about whether to keep him on the opening day roster that year, and they didn't. And then he like forced their hand with a really hot start with Sacramento, and of course never looked back. But yeah, he's kind of a Brandon Moss kind of player, and he's also like that kind of smiley personality too that they tend to draw. So
I remember telling my mom specifically about Brandon Moss, like looking up his stats at Sacramento. I'd be like, this guy, he's going to be good. He's hitting like 340 in minors.
Yeah.
Like, we might see him. My mom just like, who is this person?
Right.
Okay. So, and one random question I have for you. Who do you think is going to be the Buddy Reed of this spring? And when I say that, I mean, like, who's going to be this like dark horse kid who comes out of nowhere, makes a run at camp, and looks like he was going to make the roster. He got hurt, so he didn't. But who's a guy who we could kind of see potentially taking that route?
Yeah, it's a good question. They haven't like officially announced who will be in big league camp if there is one. So it's hard to know if any of the non-roster guys are going to be there, but I could see Cody Thomas, who was added to the 40-man roster. I see you're
he was going to ask you about Cody Thomas right afterwards.
He was talk about, it's funny, like you look back at last season and how many little things went wrong for the A's that actually had a bigger impact. And there were a couple of injuries, relievers in the AAA level that probably could have helped, that horrible disaster at the end of last year if they'd been healthy. And I really think Cody Thomas would have made a big difference when Laureano was suspended, because big time power, really got his rhythm going with his swing, outstanding athlete. And he's always been a guy that should have hit like that, but just maybe hadn't quite come together yet in the Dodgers organization. So I know they were really excited about him. It was an Achilles strain that they were just being very cautious with because they didn't want to turn it into a, Kevin Durant situation. So hopefully he's fully healthy when big league camp opens. They haven't had a chance to, correspond with him much, but he went home healthy in November. So, I think he could be somebody that, they're going to have a wide open center field competition essentially because Laureano can't start the season on the roster. So if he could stay healthy, I think he'd be a good one. And I wouldn't be surprised if, depending on how and when Major League camp starts, if Buddy Reed gets another chance too. But if the AAA season's already started, then probably not. So, we don't know.
For the podcast only listeners, I was pumping my fist when she said Cody Thomas because I'm a big fan of his. No, last year I thought he was going to be one of the key piece of that trade because I looked up his stats and he did really well in major leagues. He's hit above average in the minors. I noticed the power and everything. And my explanation to the reason why he didn't get much love and for the Dodgers was it because they have a stacked outfield. So when he came here, I was like disappointed he didn't make the major league roster. I was like really high on him, and I'm kind of hoping he fills one of these empty outfield roles that we have this coming season.
If he makes the A's roster, they will finally have an Oklahoma quarterback in their outfield. So then we can stop talking about Kyler Murray finally. So
it hurts.
Well, that actually kind of goes to my follow-up question, which is, it seems like these last couple drafts, they've really knocked it out the park. Tyler Soderstrom looks like the guy. He's the future. He looks like the guy, like he's going to be it. You talk about
your articles got me super pumped about him last year.
Yes. He's really fun to watch hit. I mean, great athlete. I mean, a really good idea what he wants to do already. He can hit the ball opposite field with power. I mean, you can't believe he's 19 or 20 when you watch him hit.
All right. But then Max Muncy righting our wrongs for letting him go.
Right.
Max, that sounds like he's going to be pretty solid. But then if you look at like the previous years where Logan Davidson, I think it's kind of too early still. But like Kyler, we're always going to think back at that. Kevin Merrill is not even in the organization anymore. Austin Beck hasn't really panned out. So do you think there's just been a philosophical change, or what's happened where these last couple of years, they've really kind of cemented like those first round picks and put them around compared to what they've done previously?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's been a philosophical change. There was a significant philosophical change right around, frankly, after the Mike Trout draft. I think there had been a sense in that draft that they had been scouted well enough to take, and they taught, Billy Owens been the A's kind of wonderkind of player development or player personnel for so many years, was really on Trout and had kind of pushed for him to be drafted. But ultimately they went with Grant Green, who was at the time a guy that had a good track record. And I think afterwards they sort of reassessed and they thought, we're not going to be able to buy superstars, at least in the current iteration. They don't buy anyone, let alone superstars. And so the only way they're going to have superstars is if they develop them. And the only way they can do that in the first round is if they sort of swing big. So I think what you've seen is they take relatively big swings for wherever they're drafting, whatever their spot is in the draft. Kyler Murray was a big swing on this, legitimately he was a very strong baseball talent. And I think that he gave off the impression that he was going to play baseball. And, I guess no one assumed, nobody, maybe even him, thought he was going to win the Heisman Trophy.
Didn't he go like 10 picks earlier than expected, though? I remember
he went a little higher, but it's like after the first 3 or 4, it's all kind of like, if you're a first round talent, you're kind of a first round talent. I mean, he hadn't played a lot because of the football thing, but when he was on the field, he was really impressive for a guy who hadn't played a lot. And you could, imagine what you could do with him when he finally got in there. Right. But they obviously missed on the and I don't mean this in makeup that he's not a good makeup, person or player, but like for baseball, clearly football was his first love and they missed that. And so, that's definitely a miss, but I think, you look at Beck was a swing that I think they were kind of hoping was going to be like a Mike Trout. It hasn't worked out that way. AJ Puck was the guy that fell to them. That was, rumored number 1 pick, and he kind of followed to them, the big fastball and stuff. And it's just been injuries. I mean, before that injury, that elbow injury, he was dominant looking. Mm-hmm. So you can't always predict those kinds of things. Davidson, I mean, the pandemic really kind of screwed up his whole development, and hopefully he can get past that. But I think that the idea is with these Max Muncy types, Tyler Soderstrom types, is that you're going for the biggest swing you can at the spot you're drafting. And they've been drafting in like 26, 27. So it's not like you're looking at top talents at that point necessarily from a ranking perspective, but they're not going safe anymore. And so you're going to, have some busts in that range. And then they get a little safer as they go further in the draft. I think last year it was interesting. There was such a huge run on pitching. And they've been kind of drafting more early position players because I think they feel like they can develop pitchers, in their system a little bit easier than they maybe can grab top talent position players. And so I think a lot of position players fell to them at spots they never assumed they'd be able to get them. Like they thought Gelloff would go in the first round. They thought Mason Miller would go higher than when they got him in the third round. Denzel Clark the outfield with fourth round pick, a lot of them projected him as a second rounder. So they were thrilled with what they came out with. And sometimes that's just sort of how the chips fall in a draft. We'll see how it all shakes out, but they've also traded a lot of their draft picks. I mean, Jamison Hanna got traded basically before he had a chance to even really be in the organization. Kevin Merrill was traded. So they did get some value for those guys, if you look at it kind of that way. But, it's definitely not been slam dunk drafts for sure. So
it does feel like it goes in waves because I remember that 2012 draft. I think it was their first three picks. They picked high school guys. And then, it was a couple years later, it's like AJ Puck, college guy, and a couple other college guys were first three picks. So it's just kind of like, I don't know. It's a weird wave that they seem to go through.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, that 2016 draft, right? Like they had 4 picks in the first 70, I think it was. And the first 3 of them, were pitchers, and all 3 of those guys, Puck, Jeffries, and Logan Shore, were, significantly impacted by injuries. And that may have kind of scared them off from drafting pitchers in the first round for a little while. And I don't blame them. It's a little harder to keep those guys healthy. So
that's why you just go full Angels and you just draft nothing but pitchers.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's totally worked out for them.
They're tired of hearing that they're wasting Mike Trout and Ohtani because they don't have a pitching staff.
Well, it's one of our we have a group chat with a couple other buddies who do a Yankees podcast, and they're saying, they're extending the playoffs. It's like, they're just trying to get Trout. And I'm like, they're going to find a way. I'm sorry.
Trout still won't make it in somehow.
It's like, I hate to say it, but they find a way every time. But that's just us being cynical.
Well, he's got to stay on the field for them to happen. It's good. Yeah, I think what a shame, though, that they're talking about is this could be 2 seasons that are robbed from him for other reasons. And then last season basically, was an injury wash, his numbers and what you would project. And then to have this happen, it reminds me of Griffey, he was on par to be well past Babe Ruth and everything. And then just the leg injury started happening. And it was like, it was just crushing.
All right. Well, Melissa, again, if you're looking to get some fantastic baseball writing, specifically with the A's and also the Giants, make sure to give her a follow.
We don't talk about that team on this podcast.
Yeah, we don't. They're like Bruno. We don't talk about.
Right, we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
We don't talk about Farhan.
We'll write the song soon. And then if you're looking to follow her on Twitter, you can also follow her at Melissa Lockard. And the last name is spelled Lockard. And then, of course, the Steamheads podcast. How often are pods going down the off season? Actually,
we've been doing we've been doing these live rooms once a month, which are really fun. I hope everybody can join on. You can actually jump on and talk to us.
Green room or Spaces or Twitter Spaces?
It's actually not. It's something The Athletic created.
Cool.
But you can jump in there. You can either chat us questions, or you can be like a live caller and jump in. And so off season we're doing those once a month. In season we were planning on doing them every other week. So hopefully we can get a season to talk about soon, and we'll be on there. But it's a kind of a fun thing if you ever want to do kind of talk radio style with us. So.
Oh yeah,
first time, long time.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Really
that was great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.